Hey everybody, thanks for coming. This looks like a fun time. I'm super excited to be on here with you all for our first Nacido and Salomon Hills Estates and Miller Family Wine Company flyover of Nacido and Salomon Hills Vineyard. If you haven't poured yourself a glass of something, this is really cool. Watch, it's a disappearing and reappearing glass of wine. If it goes out of my face, it completely disappears. So I poured actually one of our newest glasses or bottles that we made. This is our 2019 Viognier, which I will actually get into a little bit later as we do the flyover. But if you have something poured for yourself, it is going to be 5 o'clock on the East Coast. And as Jimmy Buffett says, it's 5 o'clock somewhere, right? Feel free if you have the opportunity. We have the questions open. So if you have any questions throughout the flyover, that you can ask those anytime you'd prefer, and we certainly can answer them as you'd like in the question section. So we're going to just wait a couple more minutes for a few more people to get here, but I will tell you, we're going to start this in Las Vegas, where I live. I have thankfully worked for the Miller family of Nacido and Salomon Hills since 2017 and have had a chance to spend hundreds of hours now out at the property. It's an exceptional place. I mean, in the middle of summer when it's about 57 degrees at night and there's no clouds coming off of the ocean, you can literally see the Milky Way in all of its splendor. It's probably one of the most amazing properties I've ever been to. And I live out in Vegas. Vegas has 110 degree temperatures in June, so sometimes it's a welcome rescue to make it out to Nacido to enjoy the weather of Santa Maria Valley. I know we have a couple people on here who are attending today who live in and around Santa Barbara, including our friend Wes Hagen, who is the winemaker and ambassador for the J. Wilkes wines. And he can attest to the fact that it's probably one of the most beautiful places in the world to live. So yeah, we will start here in Las Vegas. So I live down here in the south part of town. If you get the opportunity, you can see we're about 13 miles away from the Las Vegas Strip. That's it. All of that is shut down right now. Unfortunately, it's a sad day, but we're all doing it to stay home. And Nevada says, stay home for Nevada. And that's what I think we're all doing. So thank you for joining us. We will leave Las Vegas and my house, and we're going to make our way over to Santa Maria, California. So Santa Maria itself is a town in what we call the Central Coast. The Central Coast is literally that. It is the central part of California, sort of nestled in between San Francisco Bay up here and Los Angeles down to the south. Equidistant it takes about 3 hours if you're in Los Angeles to make your way up to Santa Maria. And if you are up in San Francisco, it's about 4 hours to make it down to Santa Barbara. What does that mean for us? Well, we are truly a hidden gem. Many of the wine regions of the world that have been and have received their acclaim tend to be about an hour's distant from major cities. Let's take, for example, Champagne. Champagne, if you get on the TGV from Paris, is about 1 hour north, and it's really easy to get to. If we look at some of our neighbors far to the north, for example, Willamette Valley. If you're in Portland, you can make your way south into the Willamette Valley in just about 1 hour drive. If you're in the San Francisco Bay Area, obviously it's very, very easy to get to both Sonoma and Napa. But when you talk about Santa Maria, we're, like I said, roughly 3.5 to 4 hours distant from LA and San Francisco. But the amazing part about it is when you think about the history of this region, in the United States, we were the third AVA or American Viticultural Area, period. So the AVAs are the regions that we all know: Napa Valley, Sonoma, Santa Maria, Santa Rita Hills, you have some of the ones that are lesser known, for example, out in Cole Ranch, which is one of the smallest appellations in all of the United States, and places like Augusta in Missouri, which were the very first one. The second one was Napa Valley, and the third one was Santa Maria, which is really amazing when you think about it. This little block of land in Santa Maria was where the third viticultural area was established, and it was established in 1981. due in part to the Miller family who own Bien Nacido and Salomon Hills, both of which are located inside Santa Maria. Cool part about this area is that when we look at how close we are to the coast, we're actually going to fly down right now into the area that is known as the Guadalupe Dunes. So just like Pismo and some other places a little bit north, these are true sand dunes of accumulated beach sand that has piled up over these centuries, typically made their way out from the Santa Maria River out to the ocean and has settled on these 400 or 500 foot dunes all along the coast. Of course, this is the Central Coast, and all of the water here along here is extremely cold. You do not want to go in the water if you are not wearing a wetsuit. I know a lot of people catch some of the greatest sea urchins that we ship all over the world. Japan and the East Coast, a lot of that comes from along the water here in the Central Coast, but it is icy cold. Anybody who is a surfer grew up probably used to the ice cold water. I grew up in San Diego, and you could go in the water most of the year in your trunks if you wanted to. The difference is even in the height of summer, late August, early September in the Central Coast, you really are going to need a wetsuit. But what that means for us is that we have the opportunity to have these very, very cold waters that bring in cool air. And every single day from about 12 to 4, you'll get this cold wind that blows through, starting off from the Guadalupe Dunes and making its way in through the valleys that we call the Santa Maria Valley. Now we're going to step back out just briefly, and we're going to look at the mountain ranges here in the north, and there aren't really any in the south. That's because this is what's called a transverse mountain range. So transverse mountain range is an east and west mountain range. This is unlike anywhere else in the world. For example, the Cascades, which run north and south through Washington and Oregon, right? Those create a rain shadow effect, which stops that cold water from coming in from the Arctic to make its way into the warmer parts or the drier parts of, for example, the Columbia Valley. Let's look at something like Sonoma and Napa, right? You have hills that run in both of those areas, north and south, which create these warming valleys and give us the opportunity to have a dense, hot climate. Thankfully, Sonoma has things like the Petaluma Gap and now the true Sonoma coast that give us a little bit of cool character to the wines. But if you didn't have those, they would again create a wind and a rain shadow where all of the moisture stops before it hits there. Look at something like Chile. Chile is on the windward side of the Andes Mountains, and Argentina, where Mendoza is on the leeward side. And you have those two totally different climates. You can get these beautiful, bright, herbal Sauvignon Blancs and Cabernet Sauvignons from Chile. And then you get those more big, powerful bruisers of wines up in the Andes in Argentina. But here, when we're talking about Santa Maria Valley, the mountain ranges are running east and west. So they're actually bringing in this cool air off of the Pacific, bringing it all the way in here and flushing its way into Bakersfield, into the deserts where I live and where we started the tour. Cool thing about this is, like I said, every single day between 12 and 4, you get this really great breeze that comes through, cools off the valley, and generally allows our vines to slow down. Instead of getting overripe in the really hottest days, which in Santa Maria Valley sometimes can be up in the high 90s, but are usually in the 70s, we end up with a long ripening period. And the great thing about that is the valley, as you move further and further in, tends to get a little bit warmer as the clouds blow off. So we're going to start our tour here at Salomon Hills Vineyard. So Salomon Hills is our newer vineyard at 20 years old. We actually planted this in 1999, and in October of last year had our 20th anniversary, which is fantastic. So Salomon Hills is actually one of the easiest vineyards to spot if you're traveling up the 101 highway from Santa Barbara, making your way into Santa Maria, or even going a further bit north into areas like Paso Robles. Salomon Hills is right off of the 101 freeway. Many of you will know this road here. This is called Clark Avenue. And there's another road here called Telephone Road. If any of you have ever heard of a wine or a vineyard called Clark and Telephone Vineyard, you might recognize those themselves. And you'll see that there's a vineyard over here, but Salomon Hills is just these two portions, a large portion of Pinot Noir planted on the north side of Clark Avenue, and then a portion of Chardonnay, Pinot Noir, and a little teeny tiny bit of Syrah planted on the south side. There's no winemaking facility here. In fact, our winemaker for a long time lived at the house just down in here. It's a house that was brought over, original 1920s home, and moved over to Salomon Hills. There are a bunch of palm trees in front, which if you look at the front of a Salomon Hills label, you'll actually see a large palm tree. It was one of the ways that people who were moving from back east and settling in California, they would plant a palm tree in front of their homes, and they would typically showcase a palm tree as the fact that they are now living in California, as opposed to the palm trees and pine trees or other things you might see on other parts of the world. Getting into Salomon Hills Vineyard specifically, this isn't a really good angle to see how much of a steep slope there is. So we're going to turn the camera right down here sideways so we can get a view of the angle. And most of our Chardonnay comes from some UC Davis clones right up here on the hillsides. And remember talking about cool air that comes through the gap, making its way into those hills behind and creating that wind funnel of the Santa Maria Valley. This is really one of the windiest and coldest vineyards in the entire region. It is as far west as you can get, period, in the Santa Maria Valley. And there are no vineyards planted any further west. If you go west of where Salomon Hills is, you pretty much run into the town of Orchid. You run into Vandenberg Air Force Base. And the last time I checked, there were no vines planted on Vandenberg Air Force Base. So you have this portion that kind of acts as a wind funnel. To me, the Salomon Hills Chardonnays always have this direct minerality that shows from the cloud cover as well as that wind. The other part about this is that this portion of the whole valley and everything west of the Santa Maria River is planted on entirely sandy-based soils. Now, sand soils really are great for creating two things. One of them is hydric stress, and the second one is protection from vine pests and disease, right? So you're not really going to have anything else growing in the soils next to it. If grasses start to grow, you can just pick them up, and then sometimes they just blow out from the wind. But you also have hydric stress, and hydric stress acts as a concentration agent of the fruit. If you have a rainstorm, for example, and all that rain comes into a vineyard like Salomon Hills that's entirely sandy, you end up with all of that rain passing through the soil. And the amazing part about that is if you did have a rain and you didn't pick, you don't have to worry about it filling your grapes with those little water berries that are not going to taste like anything. So the greatest vineyards in the world, typically, in my opinion, are planted on some sort of sand, and sand is just a small particle. Sand can come from anything. It can come from granite. It can come from limestone. It can come from really any soil type, but is those really, really fine grains that aren't as small as clay that allow water to pass through. Salomon Hills Chardonnay, our 2018 vintage, which I just tasted yesterday for the first time, really amazing. It's really powerful and intense, and I haven't really tried a wine like that from Salomon Hills in a number of years. 2016 was probably the most recent vintage that had that concentration and character. 2017, really lean, not as delicate as 2014, which the other great thing about our region, and I'm just throwing out all these numbers, right, is that every single year you have a different character to the wines. They really don't have, oh, well, last year tasted the same as this year, so it doesn't really matter. Every vintage you can pick up and taste in the glass. It's pretty powerful. Moving from Salomon Hills, though, and if we start to look a little bit more to the north side of the road, we're going to get where our Salomon Hills Pinot is. Most of what we pull from here are Pommard clone of Salomon Hills Pinot. It tends to make the wines a little more savory, a little more herbal, and a little more intense. The color also on Salomon Hills is always one that's magnificent to see because it has a almost ruby purple core to the wines, because the wind, again, that comes off of the ocean tends to cause the grapes to thicken themselves just because they don't want to bang against each other. So it's kind of amazing that you see that. Yeah, Salomon Hills, I always think it tends to have this balance between savory and fruity, as it is so cold, and Pinot Noir just gets ripe enough at Salomon Hills. It has this mint and green tea balanced with this red and black fruit. The ones I tasted yesterday were definitely more along the lines of cranberry and sort of white strawberry preserve, which was kind of amazing. Whereas vintages like 2015, which is definitely one of my favorites, and you can actually still get, I think we have something like 22 6-packs on the website. You can feel the richness of the vintage, and it's really cool to have them back and forth. So leaving Salomon Hills, we're going to travel about 7 miles as the crow flies up here to the north where Bien Nacido Vineyard is located. Specifically, we're going to look at the best view of the whole property that I can get. Now, we have what we call the amphitheater up here in the north, and we have the bench over to the sort of south, and I guess it's the southeast. This whole property and this large hillside that we see is all Bien Nacido. All in total, the property is about 2,100 acres, with 740 of those acres planted to grapes and another 150 acres planted to avocados. And we have a small amount of other fruits, including one exceptional Honeycrisp apple tree right by the winery. If you come out and see us towards harvest, you'll get the chance to see, hopefully taste some of the Honeycrisp apples. It's one of the rarer things you can get, period, at Bien Nacido, even more so than our wines. But as you look towards the north, the cool thing is you have a couple rivers that come off of here. The first one is the Cuyama River that makes its way up from the north through the Cuyama Valley. And you have the Santa Maria itself that makes its way all the way out to the ocean. So as I was saying earlier, everything to the south here of the Santa Maria, or I guess it's the west, is all sandy soils. You can see it has this orange-red sort of color. And as we move to the north, we tend to get into more of what we would consider this Pleasanton shale and heavy loam qualities. So you can see the soil types tend to get a little whiter and brighter, and we actually have some limestone here as well. Moving over to the first wine that I love to showcase from our property is our old vines. So all of the bench was planted back in 1973. The amazing thing is that they were planted on their own roots, which is unique in the United States and especially in France, because we all know about phylloxera. Phylloxera is a little vine louse that digs into the root system. It causes little fissures to happen, unfortunately, in the vines themselves, and you end up with fungus that can naturally grow in the root system. So the vine loss doesn't actually kill the root itself. It just causes these fissures that now other things like fungus can turn to grow into. So this is W Block. W Block is pretty famous, not only for ours, in fact that we take 100% of the fruit from W Block for our Bien Nacido Estate Chardonnay, but some other great producers make wines from this. One of my favorites is called Foxen. They're right up the road from us. Foxen actually has a wine called U Block. If you say that to yourself, what are two U's, or I guess another way to describe two U's? I guess it would be W, right? So it's funny that they created their own little name for our block. A lot of people come out to the property and they say, hey, can I see UU Block? And I say, there's no such thing as UU Block. It is W Block only. And that's located entirely right here on those old roots. The one thing I'm going to try to get to see, and you know, it's a little difficult on Google Earth here, but you see all the rows in the soil and all of those easily. Now, the cool thing is this was planted on 12-foot rows back when we planted in 1973. And because the tractors were so large, we needed that space in between to be able to get the tractors to work and till the soils. Whereas now we have things like a Clemens, for example, which is an amazing tractor and really narrow. So we went back in the late 90s and early 2000s and planted all of the bench in between the rows with younger vines. Now, what does that do? It actually adds some complexity to not only the older vines, but makes the younger vines more interesting as well. So we'll pull back out. Now, a W Block, it tends to have much more concentration to it. It is truly Santa Maria Valley, a little bit more of this brown spice quality, and always a little bit more of that limestoney character that you would get from this side of the valley in the white character. Now, Bien Nacido Pinot doesn't have the same theme as we do the Chardonnay. The Chardonnay we try to take from one single block in the vineyard, whereas the Pinot we try to take from 5 blocks. Now, I'm going to take a little pause and see if anybody has any questions that I can answer. I know, looks like Wes Hagen, good friend, wrote some things. Wes mentioned violet plate tectonics that make the coast look like NC-17 if you were a rock. It blows into his front yard in Santa Maria like snow on the coastal winds. That is beautiful. He also said they're lazy vines. They wake up late, go to sleep early, avoiding doing their work in the wind. That is absolutely true, and especially when we talk about something like Syrah. Let's see if we have any questions on the Facebook, the face space. Feel free to post any of them that you'd like, and I will answer them as I get the opportunity through here. Getting back to the point about the Pinot Noir, Pinot from Bien Nacido specifically comes from 5 blocks. Now, because Bien Nacido is so big and we had that large 2,100 acres, I wanted to be able to show you all of them and show you the reasons behind why we do what we do here. So as far east as the property goes, and this is the property line running through here, block 1 is the windiest and coldest because it tends to have a beautiful eastern exposure, but it also captures all of that wind through that funnel effect. The other thing is that as the sun goes over, you end up having the sun from the east make its way all the way over to the west and set in the west, but this portion of the vineyard is blocked by these avocados here. So the port we try to take is right over the middle of this hump because it gets the most sun exposure and gives us the most richness from that part of the vineyard. Richard had the question, location-wise, how far away from Riverbench Vineyard? Wes, if you're on, maybe you want to help answer that one. I could not answer that question right now, Richard, so I will do my best when I can. As a blend, we tend to put 5 different blocks. We put block 1. We tend to put some of our old vines from the 2 old vine blocks, block N and block Q. We tend to pull a little bit of block G. G tends to be on our heaviest soils within the property. We take the G Chico or the young vines here. And then we also take a little bit from San Vicente, planted right behind the property. The cool part about San Vicente is it has the highest density of plantings for all Pinot Noir on our property in total. It has 6,900 vines per acre, and 6,900 vines is quite a bit, obviously. Again, going back to that idea about young vines and old vines planted next to each other, the more you concentrate the fruit planted near each other, the more they struggle, the more they concentrate their fruit, the better the fruit is going to taste, right? So those 5 combined tend to give us Bien Nacido Pinot Noir. We want to get a little bit of the warmer and denser fruit from San Vicente. We want to get some of the heavier soils from G. We want to get some of the more intense wind effects from block 1, all combined together. Mark Goldberg, he asked in regards to farming, sustainable, organic, biodynamic. Everything on Bien Nacido is sustainable. So that's the first place to start. For our program, for the estate wines, because we farm for a lot of different wineries, our estate project is entirely organically farmed. We take all of the cuttings from our canes and we create our own compost, including all of the grape skins after harvest is finished, our own compost. We use nettles and peas and all kinds of different clover in the vineyard to fix nitrogen for ourselves, to avoid adding inorganic fertilizers. We are, however, not biodynamic. Biodynamics create some amazing things. I know it's very, very time consuming, and I love biodynamic wines. I mean, the Demeter Biodynamic Association is exceptional. We don't go that far to where we're putting cow manure and ram's horns, burying them until you have a full moon and pulling them out and then putting them in I believe it's called a hydroform, correct me if I'm wrong, that sort of mixes all of the nutrients together and then you go spray them in your vineyard. So we do not do that. But those 5 parts give us the blend of Bien Nacido so that you're getting a full taste of why and how we get Bien Nacido to taste. Now, one of the special wines that we make is called the Captain, named after Captain Robert Miller. He was the captain of a large naval ship, and we chose the highest portion of Bien Nacido that was planted, the most densely, second most densely planted portion, to name after him, the Captain. Now, the Captain is our flagship wine. It's the wine that we make generally the least amount of, typically around 100 cases a year. It's the one that is always the highest rated and was rated 97 points by Antonio Galloni. It was the first Pinot that he ever gave from California, 97 points, which was quite special for us. But it's all on this exposed limestone hillside. It's really cool to see because you can actually see up here on the northern portion how intense that soil tends to be. I'm going to try to spin it around here so we can see. The other part, which this photo doesn't do justice, so I'll show you exactly what's special about this, is how steep this block tends to be. We generally have a hard time driving a tractor up this portion of the vineyard because of how steep it is. So generally this has to be, of course, hand pruned and hand harvested like all of our wines. But it really gives that really, really, really barren soil of limestone that adds to the concentration of the wine. I would say that the Bien Nacido Captain is probably our most intense wine, right next to something like the Old Vines. Ooh, we're flying way, way, way out here. Wanted to give everybody some seasickness or air sickness. Getting back over to Block N. Block N is where our Old Vines come from, and the Old Vines, like I said, were planted in 73. If you look at this little bench here, though, you can see that it flattens out towards the bottom. The northern portion of the bench ripens at a completely different rate than the flatter portion. So this we actually harvest in 2 separate harvests. We put them in 2 separate fermentations, and we blend them back to get a character of the Old Vines as a whole because the fruit isn't necessarily as ripe. Going to one of my favorite portions of the vineyard, this was the first Syrah planted in cool climate California. A good friend of ours, Matt Malden, has told me that Zaca Mesa had the first Syrah planted, period. But when you talk about cool climate, which Santa Maria is, this was the original one. Fun thing to share for those of you who are on and are going to watch all the way through this. This portion of the vineyard is actually originally planted to Riesling. We had 4 grapes at Bien Nacido: Chardonnay, Pinot Noir, Riesling, and Gewürztraminer. Gewürztraminer and Riesling generally don't sell so well in terms of tonnage, and they can make exceptional wines. Of course, look at Austria and Germany. But when we talk about California, most people aren't thinking of those grapes. So in 1984, Bob Miller had the opportunity to chat with a friend, Bob Lindquist, who makes wine right up the valley from us, and he inquired about planting some Syrah. Bob Lindquist mentioned this probably wouldn't be a great idea because it gets too cold in the valley. And Bob Miller said, hey, if we plant this and we give it to you, do you think you'd make something out of it? Bob Lindquist, being one of the founders of the Rhone Rangers, decided that that was a good idea. And he put together his very first vintage of X Block in 1987. And I believe all the way through Cupé's history, he made an X Block all the way, even through the sale of his Cupé winery. And when he started the Lindquist family wines, the 2018 vintage was one of our biggest vintages ever. And he got some of that fruit and was able to continue on through his new project. So it's kind of amazing. But we grafted over that Riesling in what we call California Sprawl. And California Sprawl is essentially like a lyre. So you have the trunk of the vine coming up, and it separates out into 4 sort of spirals or lyres. We want to do this to open up the canopy so that you don't have to worry about rot. You can get as much airflow through there as possible, but they're also head high. So you can get in there and pick them very, very easily. Of course, because you have those lyres coming out, you don't have the opportunity to use any, tractors. So it has to all be hand harvested and has been hand harvested since the very beginning. X Block we make on its own as well. It's 100% Syrah, very, very, very densely concentrated and really rich wine. It's one of those, if you want to have it with Sunday supper, you open it on Friday because it needs a couple days of air if you want to resolve some of those tannins. But again, if you like those kind of punch you in the mouth, powerful stuff, this is one of the best wines that we make. I tasted the 2018 vintage again that we bottled a couple weeks ago, and it's so amazing to see the difference between the X Block and our traditional estate Syrah. The estate Syrah is light and bright. It's very beautiful. It has this almost grapefruit peel, violet flower lifted quality. The X block is a bruiser. It's beastly, it's powerful, and really, really kind of cool to taste them side by side. And I hope you get the chance to. Going into block Z, Z is where that Syrah, that estate Syrah comes from. And it's planted up on the hillside here. Many, many, many people buy fruit from this portion of the vineyard. And the great part about being an estate, meaning that we own the land, we farm it, we ferment it all on the property, is that we get the chance ourselves to pick exactly where we want. And just like block 1, if you remember, we like to pick right in the middle of the bench. As we get down here, it's sort of blocked by the wind and gets a much, much, much hotter. This is where someone like Manfred Krenkel from Sinquanon tends to buy his fruit. It tends to be a little more towards that 15.5, 16% alcohol kind of style. We like to make wines in more of a 13.5% alcohol balanced kind of quality. So we pick right through the middle, and I'll show you the amazing part about what makes this portion of the vineyard special is that you have this slope that comes in. It brings in that cold air from the west. It allows the wind to kind of ride the ridge down here and make its way back up this large peak behind. And so we get a lot of wind flow through here every single day, 12 to 4. And it's planted with a small amount of Viognier. About 1/2 of one row is entirely Viognier. We pick it, it's co-fermented together, meaning the Syrah and the Chardonnay are all put together, fermented all at one point. It tends to give a little bit more aromatics to it, but we also do it as homage to the traditional style of the Northern Rhone. And the cool part about this is that it tends to give that little lifted quality. A lot of people can see it as what I describe as grapefruit skin, but that floral violet tone to the wines. Here's one part that everybody who comes to be a Nacido, we would love to be able to show you. We actually do some tours out at the property. They're led by our winemaker, Anthony Avila. He gets you in his truck personally and will take you on this tour, but in person. We always take you up to Block Z here. And on a really clear day, you can see from the top of Block Z over this little ridge line where what we call the White Rock is, all the way out to the ocean, and you can see the ocean. As the crow flies, it's about 15 miles. So you have this beautiful, beautiful sunshine that burns off from the clouds about 11 a.m. And you tend not to have that May gray or June gloom come back until about 7. So some of the Syrah here is some of the best in California, judging by the fact that many, many people buy fruit from us, including people from out of state, like Josh Bergstrom from Bergstrom Winery. He makes one of his Syrahs from there as well. That was a rather extensive tour. It's about a half hour. Are there any questions that I can answer for you guys? I haven't even had a chance talking to drink any of my Viognier, so please feel free to jump in. I'll look at the Facebook page and see if we got any questions there, and would be happy to answer them. Let's see, for those who weren't reading the chat, Wes says Riverbench would be closer to Sisquoc, probably 150 to 200 degree days, and better for cab and easy to get Rhones right. Great Chard and good Pinot Noir. Riverbench. Wes also said great vineyards always in the middle of the hill, as the most complex soils are there, exactly broken down from geological parent material. Grand Cru is almost always in the heart of the hill, Premier Cru above and below. So yeah, this was awesome. Thanks everyone for attending. I know that there were a couple polls that I put out. If you haven't had a chance to answer, I would love it. You know, if you haven't been to be a Nacido, we would love to have you out there. I get out there from time to time. And this will be saved on YouTube. So in case you have any customers you want to share it with, or anybody in general while you're drinking through the wines from our estate property, please feel free. And since we're all at home, we are still shipping, and you can go to biennacido.com, biennacido.com, and you can get 20% off right now, which is really great. Everything is 20% off because if we have to be at home, might as well have a good glass of wine with that. Thanks everyone for coming.